My first experience getting heckled on Twitter was at a WordCamp event a number of years ago. I came down and I was going to give, well, I did give, a presentation on introduction to plugin programming. And I didn't find these comments until much later, but people were posting, hey buddy, you said this was an intro workshop, and I'm completely lost. So I know that this event, I think, attracts sort of a mix of people who are complete beginners. Some of you are experienced programmers or IT people. Some of you just want to, you may be more oriented towards the design thing, or you may be a small business person who wants to use WordPress. So, so I'll try and address a range of things. I am going to have some things where I'm going to show code on the screen. Most of it's going to be sort of pseudocode or simplified code, where I'm just trying to give you an outline of what I'm accomplishing. And the idea is that hopefully I'll bring out some things for the people who have more of the programming knowledge, will spark some ideas, maybe some things that you haven't seen before. Maybe we can have some discussion about that. And for the rest of you, I hope it will at least give you an idea of what's possible with WordPress, some of the things that I've explored. And a lot of this is going to revolve around the idea of using WordPress as the foundation for community websites or membership-oriented websites. A number of projects that I've worked on over the past several years have been along those lines. The one I'm going to talk about most is a project I call WordPress for Toastmasters. So I'm involved in a public speaking organization called Toastmasters. In that context, I have a solution that involves 2 plugins and a theme. And if you were here last month, David Bissett gave an outline of how to use a theme called Underscores, which is a starter theme, and build up from that with your own customizations. So that's what I've done in this context. So it's a theme that makes it easy for people to add the approved organizational branding. And there's also a disclaimer that has to go to the bottom of each page saying that Toastmasters International owns this branding, and if you use it, you must be an authorized Toastmasters entity of some sort. But to give you an idea of more of what I'm talking about, I'm going to go through this little demo here. So this is a WordPress-based site that includes a calendar. We can navigate through the calendar. And of course, there's standard WordPress content here. There'll be more marketing content. But we can go to different events. And then within these events, we can sign up for roles. One of the main things you want to do if you're a Toastmasters club is you want to sign people up to speak. There are different manuals that they can speak from. There are projects associated with those manuals. So you'd be trying to fill your agenda with people who've put in their information. They've filled out what the title of their speech is and how they should be introduced when it's their turn to speak. There's another whole aspect of this where you can go in afterwards and you can see all your records of all the speeches you've given over the years. As a meeting organizer, I can go in and I can pick from any member of the organization, and I can assign somebody else to roles. So maybe I got a phone call from somebody, an email from somebody, instead of getting them going to this website. What I'm showing here is we're in the WordPress editor, but instead of regular text content, we're seeing all these little placeholders. So when we were out on that sign-up form, which the sign-up form ultimately turns into the agenda, we were seeing user interface for saying, I'm going to take this role, or I'm going to assign my buddy to fill this role. This is the editor experience. And what I'll be showing you later is that these are all really shortcodes. So what we're trying to do is provide a friendlier user interface for shortcodes. And if you don't know what shortcodes are, I'll come back to that. But I'm going to let the thing play just to complete it. We'll show how somebody's going in and they're restructuring this. They're adding an additional role because their club doesn't, function the same way that my club does. They have a humorist on their agenda. And now they've added a humorous role. Somebody can come in and sign up for that. And then the happy ending to the story is we have a nice full agenda. So, this is an example of taking... Yeah. It's over. It's over. The nightmare is over. And there's a whole site that sort of advertises the concept. Okay, so for background, this is me. I am much more known as a writer and editor. Here I am on stage in Stockholm, Sweden, giving the keynote at a conference, so I can say that I am an international keynote speaker, even though it only comes up occasionally.
Oh, jealous.
I wrote a book called Social Collaboration for Dummies, which is more about corporate collaboration scenarios using products like Yammer, and the current generation would be things more like Slack today.
Can you give an example of that? I don't quite understand social collaboration.
Social collaboration, it's basically taking the concepts of social media and using them inside your company.
Oh, like SharePoint?
Well, SharePoint is usually the example of what people are trying to get away from. But there are whole... Microsoft actually bought a product called Yammer. They tried to graft it onto SharePoint somewhat awkwardly. If you use Slack, you have some of these conventions that come across, such as at-mentioning people. Anyways, it's mostly irrelevant. What I'm trying to tell you is I am a professional writer and editor. My degree is in journalism, not computer science. It doesn't make me particularly unusual in the Toastmasters, rather, in the WordPress world. A lot of the core WordPress developers have philosophy majors, and they've learned by doing like I have. So I've learned a lot of stuff through self-study. So I have a few different projects. RCP Maker is an event scheduling plugin, and it's used by chambers of commerce. It's used for people to register folks for summer camp. It's used for a lot of different things. It basically just gives you a calendar display and a way of displaying a registration form associated with that. It is probably not the most popular of the event management plugins, but it's pretty flexible, it's pretty customizable. So the people who like it. It is used by people around the world. And what I was showing you before, the agenda management functionality, is sort of a layer on top of that for signing people up not just to attend an event, but to fill a specific role in an event. And the model there is more, instead of a random person coming to the website and typing in their name and email, you want people to be logged in as members of the site. And so we can recognize them by their user ID, and when they click that Take a Role button, we can record that in the database. Let's see. I also did something called Facebook Tab Manager a number of years ago. For a while, that was the hottest ticket that I had, because Facebook had come up with a way that you could insert content from basically any web source into a tab on a Facebook page, and I figured out a way to map that into WordPress so that you could manage that content in WordPress. You could use things like a contact form plugin for WordPress and have that as part of your Facebook page. And then over the years, Facebook kind of complicated that process a little bit, and they also took away some features that people like, so it's not as big of a deal. I actually did update that plugin after about 2 years. I did it this week because I was going to come and speak here, and I said, if I'm going to look like I know what I'm talking about, I probably should get rid of this embarrassing notice saying this hasn't been updated in 2 years and it's probably not being looked at. So there's an rcpmakers.com site where you can see all the demos. Blue Broward is a political website I run that is also very much organized around an events calendar and people being able to register to post to the blog or to post calendar events. And then WordPress for Toastmasters is kind of the marketing site for the concept for Toastmasters clubs. But then within that, I have something called toastmost.org. And that is a site where you can sign up to get a free club website. So for Toastmasters clubs, they are already given a free website by the organization. And why I decided I needed to compete with that, I'm not quite sure. But it was something that I had done originally as a one-off hack for my own club website. Because I looked at this thing that they gave us, which was kind of a cookie-cutter template, and you couldn't extend it in any way. And having done some other WordPress work, I said, well, this is crap. I want to be able to use the website as an effective marketing tool for my club. I became an officer of the club, and I was trying to help recruit people. So I said, well, there's this little agenda management piece, which is kind of nice, but that wouldn't be hard to duplicate. And, 6 years later, I'm still working on it. And a lot of what I have learned is from, random tutorials on the web, studying the documentation websites for WordPress, studying different sites. I'm going to reference this. Let's see. This one is Take Your Shortcodes to the Ultimate Level. It was a tutorial that showed me how to do that thing with the placeholders for the shortcodes. So I posted a link to that in the meetup group. Stack Overflow, of course, is a great source of wisdom on all sorts of things. There is also a WordPress Stack Exchange site that is a little bit more specific to WordPress problems. So usually, if you're persistent and you have an idea and you say somebody somewhere must have solved this idea or solved this problem or something like it elsewhere, if you go searching, you'll probably find something, some tutorial, some answer that has a little snippet of code that you can get started. And a lot of what I've done is building up from there. So, what does WordPress have to offer beyond the blog? Well, you can manage other types of content beyond just posts and pages, which is the defaults, by extending it and creating what are called custom post types. So you can have that for, it's been done for e-commerce, product catalogs. At some point you have to wonder whether is this stretching WordPress too far beyond what it's good for? And you could ask that about the Toastmasters example too, but I think it makes sense. You also have a user system that has a lot of things that you don't have to create for yourself, such as the ability for people to reset their passwords. All that security stuff is built in. The idea of having different levels of access control are built into the system. You don't have to create it yourself. So that's a foundation to build from. And you can restrict access to all sorts of functions by security level or by whether somebody is logged in or not. The basic profile for a user is just, I think it's just first name, last name, email address, and a couple of other web-related things. But you can extend it to collect people's phone numbers, to track their Toastmasters ID in the case. So those are all things that you can modify. And in the Toastmasters example, we can also track member activity in the educational program. So we can tell you how many speeches you've given out of the basic manual and whether you're about to earn your first level award in the educational program. So RCP Maker, again, is a foundation for what I built here. So it's a general purpose plugin. If you're looking at the listing, it shows you a button at the bottom that says RSVP Now. If you click on that, you go to a form that asks for some basic details. And you can customize that form to collect details like if it's a dinner you're registering people for, what their meal choice is. There's integration with PayPal built in. I also support Stripe through integration with another plugin. So there's a WP Simple Pay for Stripe plugin, and I figured out what their API was enough to allow you to substitute Stripe payment if that's what you want to do. So how do you create a plugin? It's actually fairly simple. If you create a PHP file that has a comment at the very top that says plugin name something, and you upload it into the plugins directory, or usually you put it in a subdirectory of plugins. So if you know the organization of directories, it's WP content, then plugins. You put it in plugins, or a directory specifically for your plugins, and it has that header. When you go into the WordPress admin panel, you will see something waiting there saying, would you like to activate my plugin name? So, and you can do, if you don't want to publish it, it's not much more complicated than that. So if you have some one-off hack that you want to do for your own website, you can create your own plugin. Okay, but what does it do? Well, at first it doesn't do anything. It's just a header file. It's not going to do too much. But in order to get it to do anything, you have to hook into elements of the WordPress system. So the hooks are actions and filters. And these occur basically constantly. I don't know how many of actions and filters there are. But every time you load, say, a page on the public website, there's an init action saying that the system has initialized. There's an action when you get into the part of the theme loads that shows the header of the page. There's a WP head action that fires. And you can have it detect a condition, output a bit of code at that point. Every time it displays the title, before it is displayed, is passed through a filter called the title. And before the main body of the blog is displayed, it's passed through a filter called the content. And so you can modify that title or that content however you want. There are filters that are specific to what goes on in the editor. You can filter the SQL query that looks up what posts should be displayed, or you can filter just the where clause within that filter that identifies what things should be displayed or what orders they'll be displayed. So for RCP Maker, it has to go through a series of filters for an events listing so that they are displayed in the order of what's the next event, which is what we care about. It's not what was posted most recently, which is what we care about when we see a blog listing. We want to see the most recent thing posted. We don't care when the event was posted. We care that it's tomorrow, and we want people to sign up. So there's some manipulation that I have to go through to modify the query, and instead of just looking at the post date, it pulls in some metadata about that post that includes the date, and it sorts on the event date. So here's an example of creating a custom post type. So every time RSVP Maker initializes, it has to know what to do with these events. It has to know that it has an additional event type called RSVP Maker. So on init, call this function. That's the action. You put in the action, you put in the function that is called whenever that action occurs, and then a series of parameters. And a lot of these things, it's really a matter of looking it up from the reference book, copy and paste, modify, tweak until you get it right. But these are the labels that would appear in the administrative dashboard. So add new RSVP event instead of add new post, edit RSVP event. So you put in all these things sort of singular and plural. You say what icon should be displayed next to it. This is something that would be public. It's queryable. On and on. So, okay, so filters to modify the elements of a standard post. So, a filter function, this is the example of the content. So add filter the content is in my plugin file, and every time the content is called, we go to this function, event content. Event content, one of the first things it does is it tests, is this an RCP Maker post? Is the post type equal to RCP Maker? If not, get the heck out of here. Return that content and don't mess with it. But if the answer is yes, then we're going to look up what the dates are associated with that event, and we're going to display that at the top of the post. And we would also check for things like, did the person who set this up want to collect registrations? And if so, then the registration form gets added at the bottom of the post. But in between, you can do standard WordPress content. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it, is you can use the standard editor to create your marketing about why people should sign up for this event, and then let the plugin handle some of these mechanics. This is another related example. So here we're filtering the title, which is actually the HTML title tag. So this is what would appear on your browser tab at the top. So here we're going to add a filter on WP title, and it's going to call this date title function, which again will look up the date and will add the date to the end of the title, just so we can distinguish between, if there's a series of events that all have actually the same name, because it's the name of the same group, to have a way of distinguishing them. So if somebody sets a bookmark for that or looks it up, they'll see the date in the title. And it also helps with social sharing. I don't know if you saw when I went by, but when I was playing the role of an editor or a meeting organizer trying to organize this Toastmasters event, and I was assigning other people to roles, every time I changed the selection on the drop-down list, there would be something that would pop up saying, so-and-so has been assigned to speak, or so-and-so has been assigned to be the Toastmaster of the day. So that's an AJAX function in the background. It's detecting, so we're using JavaScript to detect that the selection has been changed, to send a message to the server. So that is this over here. This is jQuery code. When the editor assign selection box has been changed, the user ID is this function. So it'd be the ID of the user on the has been selected on the drop-down. There's a little bit of security code to try and make sure that this is a legitimate request. Gather together a bunch of information, send it to the server, and then we have a PHP function assigned over here. And this is the way AJAX works in WordPress. When you submit something through JavaScript, you assign one parameter called action, and the action here is editor assign. And the action then is WP AJAX, and then whatever it is over here. Okay, so whenever a submission comes in that is submitted through AJAX, it goes to a specific address it goes to a specific file in WordPress. WordPress will try and figure out what that action call should be based on this parameter. Then it calls the function. And so here we would be taking in the data from the post and then updating metadata on that post. So we're getting the post ID submitted, update metadata on the post, and I want to assign this user ID to that role. That's basically how it gets saved into the WordPress database. So there are functions like this update post meta. There's a similar function for users. Like I said, you could save the phone number, you could save the Toastmasters ID, you could save a lot of other information to the user record. So if you looked at the WordPress database, you would see there's a table called users, which is basically the username and the password, and a few other parameters. Email address, I think, is in there. And then everything else that you gather about that person goes into a table called user meta. It's very similar for the post. There's the post table, which is the headline, the content, the ID number, when it was last updated, the basic information about the post, but then you have a whole other table that contains metadata. And it's all keyed in by some sort of slug, some sort of keyword, and the post ID. So those are the two things that you would need to look up. So the opposite would be get post meta. I would call it get post meta if I'm trying to retrieve who has signed up for this role. Or in the RCP Maker example, if I'm trying to retrieve the data associated with that post that tells me what the form should look like. Okay, this is adding to the editor user interface. So you're familiar with the basic editor that you would use to create a post, includes these default fields. Well, again, here we're saying whenever the admin menu is loaded, I want to call it my events menu, and I'm going to add a meta box with this slug and this name, and the function it's associated with is called draw event dates. And draw event dates is going to give me the options in the editor that I need to set the date of the event. Okay, so that we're turning it into an editor for events rather than an editor for blog posts. When that loads, it's going to look up custom fields, all that metadata associated with the post, and then it goes to this show the administration form. And you get something that looks like this. So this is event options, event options. It's looking up the date that's currently assigned, and it's also giving me a way to modify that. So date, time, duration of the event, and then collect RCPs that can be checked or not checked. So you might have some events that you just want to announce. You don't necessarily need people to register for. But if you do want people to register for them, you click there. I have a little bit of JavaScript here too, because if collect RCPs is turned on, there's a whole bunch of other fields that open up for what should the registration form look like, and who should the email notifications be sent to. So those details are all shown if that field is checked, or not shown if it isn't. Then this would be the function that every time I save a post, I also need to capture the information. So this is all custom information here. By default, WordPress doesn't know what to do with it. But the action here says whenever I save a new post, I'm going to call this function, which gets as an argument the post ID. And it goes through a series of routines here. If it's not, I don't think I have this showing here, but if it's not an RCP Maker event, again, it's going to exit out of this, and you're not going to mess with something that is not relevant to the RCP Maker plugin. But if the RCP Maker, this is actually that checkbox that I was showing you. If this is set to on, then we're going to save all the metadata related to collecting RSVPs. So shortcodes are ways of representing programming functions within a post. So you put a placeholder within the post that says, whenever you see this on a page, for example, generate the calendar listing for RCP Maker. Or it could be generate a form whenever you see that content. So for the RCP Maker upcoming event, shortcode, when that's called, it's going to add all these filters that modify the SQL query, the database query for looking that up. You can have attributes on the shortcode. So if it was set to past equals 1, then it would look up the past events instead of the future events. Otherwise, it's going to look up future events. So once all this has been started, we can go into a standard WordPress loop. So everybody understand what the WordPress loop is?
We actually talked about it at last meetup, I think, or the meetup before that.
Well, I guess you were talking about themes. So your theme file has to start the loop, right? So it basically it looks up.
This is why what workshops.
Right. It looks up whatever should go on this particular page. So in this case, instead of looking up the blog posts to display, it's looking up the events to display. And so what we're looking for is an output like this, where we have the calendar and we can have a listing of events. And in the editor in text mode, we would see it like this. So you see the shortcode RSVP Maker upcoming. It's enclosed in the square brackets. And within that shortcode, we can also have parameters. So calendar equals 1, for example, says that the calendar should be displayed at the top of the event listing. We can also go into visual mode, though, and we get the image placeholder, and we double-click on that to get a pop-up user interface that allows us to say, should the calendar be on or off? How many listings should be displayed? How many weeks ahead should we look? And this is a way of making a shortcode a lot more accessible to people who are uncomfortable working with code. And I'll show you how to do that within the WordPress visual editor, also known as TinyMCE. You can have a script that includes the same regular expression that recognizes a shortcode that's used in PHP. There's a JavaScript version of it that recognizes that this looks like a shortcode. It identifies what the attributes are on the shortcode, things like calendar equals 1 or calendar equals 0. And it can load that into its own customized editor. And there's some scheme for when you create the image representation, the image tag that's generated includes some of that information too. And this is one of the dangers of taking other people's code and modifying it. I don't entirely understand how it works either, but I've got it to work for me regardless. On the image tag, so you have HTML image tag would be src equals, and normally it's a file. So here it's actually pointing to a URL on the site. Our plugin is going to recognize that that URL is asking for this image, and it's going to load the image and modify it, and add text. So this is some of that JavaScript code. You have to register this so that it will get loaded at the same time that the editor gets loaded. It breaks down the attributes associated with the shortcode, and for a URL, it's going to call out to RSVP Maker placeholder equals 1, so the file. So this is constructing within the editor as it loads the content, instead of just displaying the shortcode, it's going to display an image. And to get that image, we're calling out to a web address. Again, this is this would be an action on init. This function is loaded. If it doesn't see this marker saying that we're looking for the RCP Maker placeholder, it returns. Again, it just doesn't mess with that request if it doesn't see that. But if it does, then it's going to load a file. So there actually is just basically a blue blob, a blank version of that placeholder as a file in the system, loaded up where the plugin files are loaded. It's going to get that path. It's going to create the image, and it's taking URL parameters. So if it was question mark RCP Maker placeholder equals 1 and note equals X, then X would be rendered in the body of this image. So it takes the image in, it modifies it, and then it's going to display it and exit. So it has to exit before your regular HTML content would be output. So again, we're basically intercepting this call to the website, and we're making it pretend to be an image. If we want to add additional administration screens on the back end, we can do that by add action admin menu, and then we have our function name. The function name, this is just declaring where the menu is going to go. So it's saying it's going to be a submenu under where we display the RSVP Maker listings, and it's called RSVP Report. In order to access this, you need to have the permission to edit others' posts, so you need to be an editor. And then the function name is going to be RSVP Report. So function RSVP Report will either, if a specific event is going to be displayed, it will grab the ID number of it. Otherwise, it's going to display a listing of the events to choose from. If we do have a specific event identified, here is the SQL for pulling that information out. And then, this is my favorite WordPress function name of all time, get results. So the database says, you tell the database, get results, and it either succeeds or fails. If it comes back with some results, then you can, for each is a way of taking an array of things and going through them one at a time. So each one gets turned into a row, and then you display the data associated with each row. And so that would look something like this. So again, it's under RSVP events. RSVP report is what shows up on the menu, and then here's our listing of the people who signed up for this event. You can also have a dashboard that's customized to your specific purpose. So these folks are Toastmasters. In the case of the WordPress for Toastmasters example, they don't care that there's a meetup about WordPress over in Davie. Most of them don't care. They care about how to run their own organization. So we're trying to simplify that for them. This is the part that's seen by every member. They see if they have signed up to do something at the next meeting. They see here's where they can go to sign up for a future meeting. They see how to print up the sign-up sheet. And then there are these other things that would only show up to the officers or the admin of the site. Here's where you go to get your reports. So basically, one of the things that you find out I always thought that WordPress was simple. I just tell people it's really just a web-based word processor with a couple of extra buttons. Don't get confused by all the other stuff. But people do get confused and rattled if you try and invite people who are not tech people in. They will get lost in all these menus, particularly if they're coming in as an administrator. So trying to give them some way of pointing them to the things that they really need to know is important.
So anybody can go in here? All these people will find the back office?
Let's see.
Just
In this example, any club member would sign in and would be able to see all this stuff. They would see a simplified menu. They wouldn't.
okay.
The security levels in WordPress are subscriber, contributor, author, editor, administrator, and I actually added an additional one called manager. So a manager is kind of a super editor, but not quite an administrator. And they can all have different access rights. So, and so a regular member usually has subscriber level privileges. They would not be able to go in and create a blog post or edit the home page or anything like that. But they could sign up for a meeting, because that's what we're using the system for in this case, or one of the things we're using it for. And this is modifying the dashboard. So again, there's an action. Every time you go back to the admin page, there's an action that is called. You can add your own functions to that. There is a somewhat complicated process of how you force your widgets, your dashboard widgets, to go to the top of the list. So I had to find a tutorial on that. It's one of those things that you have to look up every time you do it, because it's kind of gnarly. Maybe there's even a simplified API for doing it, but I haven't found it yet. And another thing as part of this process is I have a custom registration flow for registering users. So, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'd be better off using the standard WordPress registration function. But I'm trying to get people into the system in a specific way. And so, and I'm trying to set up some additional metadata on them, like home phone. But you can write a function that takes an array of information like this: user login, password, email, first name, last name, home phone, and you really can add just about anything you want down here. WP insert user, you insert that whole array of data. You call this and it's going to insert them into the user table. If it's a multi-site install, there's also a function where you can take a user and associate them with a specific blog ID or a specific site within that. And you can assign what their default role is going to be. And then to add metadata to a user account, you would do user ID, whatever your slug or keyword is for that, and then the data that you want to insert. The opposite is get post meta, user ID, the slug, and true here says I only want one version of that returned. Sometimes these things can have multiples, and if it thinks there might be multiple versions of it, it's going to return an array. But I just want to get back one number per person. Then we can have functions that say, is the user logged in? Just by user ID. Or there's also an is current user logged in. So certain things in that system you're not supposed to be able to access if you don't have a user ID, if you're not a member of the club. So we can control the display of them that way. Or is user member of the blog? As soon as I got into the multi-site setup, I had to replace a lot of is user logged in functions with is user member of blog, because that's a different question. So you can be a member of the, you can have a user ID on a multi-site website, but not be a member of that specific site. And then all sorts of functions related to whether the current person can do something. So manage options would basically be an administrator, somebody who can go in and change all the settings on the site. So you can either do current user can, or you can do user can and add the ID, depending on the context. The way I use the custom registration process on the Toastmasters site and also the political website I run is I first make them sign up for an email list. They have to have, so there's an API call to the MailChimp service that says, is this email address associated with, is it active on the list? And if the answer is yes, then they can proceed and they can fill out a registration form. And if no, then they have to register. And then once they've completed that form, then we ask them for the name of their club, the web address that they're going to use, and other data that we need, such as the time zone. All right, I'm almost done. So you can have custom roles and permissions as well. I mentioned that I have a custom role called manager in the Toastmasters solution, and so you can create a custom role and add privileges to it. So a manager can add and delete these RCP Maker files. You could have somebody who only had the rights to edit the calendar records, did not have the rights to edit blog posts or pages, for example. You can also add capabilities to existing roles. And I thought administrator could just do anything. That's actually not true. If you add custom permissions to the system, then you have to also add them to the administrator role. And you would have to add them to any other role that they applied to. All right, finally, multi-site. So multi-site is where you have a single WordPress install, but you can have multiple independent websites within it. So they're all subdomains. So demo.toastmost.org is the demo site that people can come in and play with just to get an idea of how the software works. op.toastmost.org is the online presenters Toastmasters Club that I started for people who are interested in webinars. You want to stop by Monday nights at 7:30, we do an online meeting. So in order to turn this on, it's one of these things that you have to look up in the codex every time. So you have to look it up in the WordPress documentation. Basically it starts with, they tell you to add this line to your WP config file. So you FTP and change that. And then it sort of walks you through a wizard that asks you some of these parameters to fill in. And it'll give you back the code that you need to add to complete the process. You will also need to, for that scenario where you have different subdomains as your multi-site addresses, there's also something that you would need to change for your DNS. If you're on a web host that includes the cPanel utility, it's actually not that difficult. You basically, instead of creating a single subdomain, you put in an asterisk, and it treats it as, it's going to recognize any subdomain, it's going to direct it to a certain address. And there are also some changes you make to the HT access file that determines some redirects. Once you've done that, you wind up with your database looking something like this, where, so usually your posts file, your blog posts, would be a prefix, underscore, and posts, but you can have lots of these in the same database. So each one gets its own tables. It would also have its own post meta table, a bunch of other things, its own options table. The thing that's shared is actually the user accounts. So no matter which site you're a member of, you go into the users, one central users table. You have a login that can work for multiple websites, but then there's also a process of associating people, assigning them to different websites. So they're not automatically members of all of them. And then you would also wind up with your uploads directory. So every time somebody uploads a photo, it's going to go into a site subfolder, and it's numbered by the ID of that site. Yes?
Hey, can you go back 2 slides for a second? Blog and site current, oh, no, wait, that's like, wait, okay, stop.
This?
Site ID, current site, remind me about the bottom 2.
I don't know.
Okay.
I told you it's something that the wizard spits out, really.
Oh, okay, no, I'm sorry.
It's
No, because I'm like, oh my God, like,
I mean, I think that
not that I'm amazed I don't remember this.
there are other ways of doing it, I guess.
Oh, okay, I gotta look that up then, because that's gonna bother me. Okay, thank you. Thank
Well,
you for allowing me to play with something today instead of talking with the way.
Yeah, no, tell me what you figure out.
All right, cool.
And then you can also have scripted creation of websites, which is another aspect of what I've done here. So I showed you, so that sign-up form, the one I showed you, it forces people to sign up for the mailing list first, so that I can stay in touch with them. If they're going to get a free site, I at least want an email address off of them. But then they can go ahead and register. They can put in the name of the site that they're going to have, and they can put in the subdomain prefix. So there would be those letters that appear before the .toastmost.org. We take that information and we can create a new site with a title and a site owner. And if that fails, we can show an ugly error message. But if it succeeds, then we switch to the blog, and then we can start adding some parameters. We can add some default content. So it adds a post that's saying, we're trying WordPress for Toastmasters. Isn't that wonderful? Why don't you check it out? And it'll add that post. And it's going to add a bunch of other default content as well. So now I've registered a user, I've created a site, and I've made them the administrator of the site in a scripted process. And you know, there is a default way that you can turn on for a multi-site install, where people can register and create their own site. But I wanted it to be the way I wanted it to be. And then we would also add a bunch of options, such as, usually these are not a blog listing on the front, they're a page on the front, so we create a page and we assign that to go on the front. There are a few routines here for adding standard meeting templates, adding standard pages. I get rid of the default category in WordPress is uncategorized or undefined or something, which I always think is dumb. So I make that club news, so it's a little bit more meaningful. And we create a category called members only. If a blog post is created and tagged as members only, then only members can see it without logging in. So it's a way of sharing things like meeting minutes. And then this would be the long and growing list of sites that have been created here. And by the way, I went into this thinking maybe a little too much like a .com entrepreneur in terms of, well, we'll prove it out, we'll see if we can get people interested, and we'll worry about the money later. And I'm just at that point of later, where this is starting to, for a long time I was trying to convince people that it was worthwhile, Now they're starting to sign up faster, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to need to do when I need a server upgrade or something. I have also worked on a number of API integrations, PayPal, MailChimp, Mailman, which is a basic Unix mailing utility. There's a way that when you add a new user, they can automatically be added to the Mailman list.
Broke the mold when they came up with that name.
Yeah, well, I've been able to find a good alternative. BuddyPress, I've done some integration with, so that when people sign up for a meeting role, a post would automatically be created in BuddyPress. And then Stripe, I mentioned via another plugin. And there's lots of follow-up information, including, again, if you're interested in webinars, stop by Online Presenters every Monday night. Club Awesome is a brick and mortar club in Coral Springs that meets at 7 a.m. on Friday morning. So if you...
When? I'm sorry, when?
7 a.m. So if you'd like to get up early, or you can be persuaded to get up early, come visit Club Awesome.
I'm sorry, unless my children are on fire, and there is no one out to no one else left to take care of it.
Well,
But hey, you know what?
it's a great group of people.
Good time.
Where in Coral Springs?
We actually just moved. We are now going to be at the Iceplex, the Panthers Iceplex. We had been in another location and we got thrown out. We had been thrown out of the Iceplex a number of years ago, so it's under new management, so they're taking us back. And I used that weird fact in some of our marketing a few years ago. The last time we were there, I got the president of the club out onto the ice. We put the lectern out there and got her standing behind the lectern, holding a gavel with the Zamboni going by in the background. And so we used that as just a freakish fact about our club and where we met to try and generate interest.
Fun at parties.
Whatever works.
Fun at parties.
So I don't know where I am between my eyes glazed over and you saw something interesting in that spectrum. Are there questions, or are you ready to move on to the next presentation?
Well, I saw a few things in there that I honestly do not know, or I had my memory wiped. So I would definitely need to, beyond even those two pieces.
So sometimes people who know what they're doing will see what I've done and say, you really shouldn't do it that way.
Oh, we're not really a judgmental group. I mean, if I've been running this for years, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Our
Well,
standards
but,
are really low.
you can filter almost everything in WordPress, including security parameters, and I've done some of that. So that again,
So
it could be dangerous, but
So, obviously the slides that are going to be available, and we'll link to them in the meetup.com. Is there any plugins that anybody saw in the presentation that they were kind of interested in terms of, maybe I could use this plugin? Because I would like, I know we've been talking about those standards. Yeah, I mean, for the entire group.
RCP Maker is probably the most broadly useful one, but yes, sir.
First, thank you for breaking down that site. It's interesting how you built it. I had a question on when you made the custom role for the manager. Do you have to define everything that role can and can't do, or can you say it's basically an administrator, but it can't, just assign the differences?
Yeah, pretty much yes. You have to define everything that they have to do. So you can. I think I found a definition somewhere of what the administrator can do by default. So the manager was a way of allowing people to be an editor of the site, but also to be able to create users and reset users' passwords. So I didn't want to expose them to some of the other administrative functions, but if you're the VP of membership of the organization, you want to be able to set people up with an account on the system. So that was my workaround for that. That was the main reason for creating that one. Yes.
So is RSVP Maker a free plugin, or is it something you purchase, and where can you get it, and is it available to people other than Toastmasters?
Oh, yeah, no, so yeah, RSVP Maker has nothing to do with Toastmasters
Okay.
by itself. So it was originally created for a political campaign where the candidate said, I want a big red button that says RSVP now. And it wasn't originally even a WordPress plugin. It was something that I sort of, built in PHP and MySQL and later retrofitted into WordPress. So that can be used for all sorts of event registration. It is free. I do have like a donations widget on the site where sometimes people throw me a few bucks. And I actually have been trying to figure out what the premium upgrade would be.
Well, it looks like a premium plugin now.
Yeah. Well, I have a weakness for volunteer projects and kind of doing things for free, and I am self-employed, so I should lose that. But I'm mostly self-employed as a writer and editor, I occasionally get hired to customize websites. So I guess my goal is to be, the all-around jack of all trades, content. That, a web experience really should be content and functionality all working together, right? So, I interview technology executives about things like what constitutes a good user experience, and this is kind of my way of playing around with those ideas.
So one more question. Is it in the WordPress repository, or do we go to rsvpmaker.com to get it?
It's in the WordPress repository. RCP Maker is basically demos and documentation.
Okay.
Some of the documentation isn't as good as it should be, but what do you want for nothing?
Right.